Hello and welcome to Finextra. I am Debbie Bell, and today we're going to be discussing meeting the FSA's mobile recording regulations. And joining me today is Jocelyn McCaffery from the FSA. And Jocelyn, I believe that you're one of the architects of the regulation.
That's correct. In March 2009, the fixed line rules for taping were introduced by the FSA, and since then, as a team in wholesale conduct policy, we've been assessing the feasibility of extending the taping regime to cover mobile phones. So we've been working on this issue for just over 2 years.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And also joining us is Ryan Shutleworth. Now, Ryan, you're going to give us the technical point of view. You're from Compliant Phones. Tell us a little bit more.
That's right. So Compliant Phones is a software vendor, and we've been supplying mobile phone recording solutions for a few years now. And clearly the FSA regulation means that we're branching out into financial services beyond Fortune 1000 and healthcare and so on that we've been doing previously.
And seated next to you is David Kemp. And David, you're the voice of compliance from Autonomy. Can you give me a little bit more of your background?
Sure. I'm the Executive Director of Legal Policy at Autonomy. This is an information governance software company that supplies technology to the FSA itself and to other regulators as well as to large institutions. What we're specialising in is, if you like, the conceptual analysis of information, especially to help regulators and also compliance officers in institutions. By background, I had 19 years at ABN AMRO RBS, 11 years as a corporate banker, and 8 years as a legal and compliance business manager. So I feel I understand things from both the front end of what the business is looking for, but also what compliance and also legal need to understand.
And picking up from that, David, today's discussion is about considering the compliance officer. Now, Jocelyn, mobile phones are used every day. It's something we're very, very familiar with. Are the banks happy about the regulation?
Well, I think banks understood very well the reasons why we've had to remove the mobile exemption, extend it to mobile phones. I think most banks would accept that market abuse can be conducted on mobile devices, and therefore it made sense for us to remove the exemption from into mobile phones. There have been some areas of disagreement, and these have tended to focus around the timetable for compliance. And we've put down that banks should be up and running in terms of their recording solutions by the 14th of November. Mm-hmm. But I think there's been strong disagreement from banks in terms of asking us to wait for developments at a European level, because there are moves afoot at the Commission level to harmonise a taping rule across Europe. And then secondly, I think there's been a little bit of disagreement around the quality of technology vendors available, and banks have found that they've disagreed with the timetable in that regard, thinking that it is very difficult for them to comply by the 14th of November.
Now, thinking about technical, that leads us very nicely to you, Ryan. What are your thoughts on the banks being ready by the 14th of November?
Well, clearly I'm speaking to most, if not all, of the banks in the city, as other vendors are. I think there's a strong desire to get this moving, because it's a natural thing to do. They want to encourage the use of mobile technologies in their environments, and anything that brings it under a compliance umbrella clearly helps. There's a lot of pressure from staff, high-valued staff, to be mobile and to use the latest technologies. And whilst Jocelyn says the technologies tend to be sort of first generation at the moment, and of course these things all have their teething issues, there are solutions out there, and it's a big timetable they've got to meet, but they're trying their best to get there.
And David, in terms of compliance and banks?
I think the point is that the way that the FSA has explained this is that effectively this is simply adding mobile communication to the other means of communication being overwatched or provided with surveillance by the FSA. And therefore, it's really a question of just a new means of delivery, and a new means, therefore, of both actually doing the deals, but also there are opportunities possibly for inappropriate behaviour, which of course the compliance officer has to watch out for. So therefore, it's a question of, can we capture the mobile traffic? Can we record it? Can we store it? And also, can we analyse it?
And Jocelyn, will there be any discretion in what's being recorded?
The rule is clear that voice and electronic communications are going to be captured by the new rule. The intention behind that is that clearly the medium through which relevant conversations are taking place has progressed from voice onto other forms of communication, texting, instant messaging, even Facebook, the internet. So our intention is for firms where they are making relevant conversations with any great frequency on one particular medium, our preference is that the firm records that particular medium. So the rule is quite clear. Where there is a particular volume of traffic on one particular medium, the firm should record it.
Your thoughts on that, Ryan?
I think that the banks are approaching this quite pragmatically. Recording some of the forms of media that are out there is actually very technically difficult. Capturing social networks and so on is challenging. So in such cases, they're simply removing the capability to do that from inside their environment. Capturing mobile communications and the sort of question around discretion, I think that they are capturing voice, they're capturing voicemail, they're going to catch SMS and so on with these technologies. I think where the question arises is more to do with should they be recorded at all, depending upon certain international considerations. And different jurisdictions in different countries that might impact them when they operate internationally.
And the issue of discretion and compliance?
I think the FSA is extremely clear in terms of its standards that it expects. This is a means of communicating and transacting, and therefore for the protection of investors and counterparties, it is necessary that there is surveillance. Of course, one of the issues here is just the sheer volume of traffic. And secondly, the fact that it is just simply not possible to take all this traffic and put it into text and then to look at it. This has got to be an automated process. So that's one issue in relation to the capture and storage. It's one issue. The second is using automation for the analysis of this information to make sure that the standards of the bank in relation to the control room, the watch list, are adhered to.
I mean, it's immense, really, when you consider what has to be undertaken, isn't it?
I think it's a matter of structure. The banks can't be too surprised that the FSA has asked, or insisted rather, that this is installed. And I think from their point of view, they realise, as Ryan was saying, that mobile telephony is the future. Yes. It's already here. And while it is theoretically, it's possible, of course, to ban mobile phones at all from a dealing room, which might be one solution, the reality is that they are just now part of everyday life. And therefore, the consequence in relation to dealing rooms is bearing in mind they're there to make money and to move competitively and to be agile. From that point of view, if you hinder and hamper how the dealer operates and his means of communication, you may actually be slowing up the business. So the question is, it's finding that balance between the two. If you want to use a mobile phone, then the FSA is very clear as to the standards that are set. But one also has to say, what are the consequences? The consequences are that you need to capture it. And secondly, if you've captured it, you then have constructive knowledge of what is in that storage bin.
And I can feel Jocelyn wants to add something.
Well, I was going to say that the guiding principle for firms here should be the reasonable step standard. We're only asking firms to take reasonable steps, so it wouldn't necessarily be reasonable for a firm that had predominant relevant conversations on voice communications to necessarily tape or record something on text or instant messaging if only a small volume of traffic relating to relevant conversations took place in that medium. So the relevant step standards should be adhered to here as a guiding principle.
And then, Jocelyn, staying with you, what happens when you do mobile transactions in territories outside of the UK?
Well, the rule again is quite clear here. We've said that only where an individual is roaming and doing business and conducting relevant conversations on behalf of a UK-based firm would they need to tape. So if they're roaming in Japan but they're conducting business for an overseas office, we wouldn't expect the firm to tape. It only concerns a UK-based firm as things stand now.
And on that point with compliant phones, Ryan.
Well, that's actually very challenging to achieve because it sort of requires a bit of cognizance about what's actually going to happen or where somebody is or who they're phoning or what business they're conducting when somebody's using a mobile phone. So the sort of policies that people try to put around it are quite complicated. So I think that the solutions that sit out there today that try to address this really have to be quite intelligent about what they do with a call, who's calling, what location they're in, and whether they should record it or not in the first place. And I think that the banks are struggling to find, consistent platforms that can do that, and that can then link into their fixed line assets in the future and do a similar job for that to bring it all together as a coherent whole. And certainly the international problem is one I think that the banks are going to have taken a bit of blanket technological view across now, and it will become more and more pressing over the next 6 to 9 months about how they then address some of the finer detail in what Jocelyn's saying. Yeah.
And David, want to add anything to that?
I think while it is clearly a daunting task, as Ryan describes, nonetheless the technology does exist for universal, global, real-time data acquisition, and therefore the capture of that, and to make it possible, therefore, for the storage to be achieved, and therefore for compliance to be applied to it.
And Jocelyn, as the FSA, what sort of measures are you taking to enable you to monitor the regulation?
Well, this is removal of an exemption to an already established taping regime. So we would monitor this the way we do any other adherence to any other rule.
Yes.
So once the rule has been implemented on the 14th of November, it will pass predominantly to our supervision division. So those firms that are relationship managed, then we would expect the supervisor to keep a close eye to ensure that the firm has actually taken reasonable steps to record, or indeed if they so choose to ban mobile phones and to police that ban. So it will come down to the day-to-day supervision to ensure that, that firms are in compliance.
And David, what impact do you think this will have on compliance operations?
Well, as Jocelyn says, in fact, the same sanctions will continue as to whether it's a fixed line or whether it's mobile. It's the same issue as to whether the rules, both of the FSA and of the institution itself, are being followed. Those haven't changed. It's really, as Jocelyn was saying, it's more the medium that's being, an additional medium is being added to the way in which the regulator can observe the activity that's being conducted on the dealing room floor.
And in terms of mobile recording regulation, what's happening in territories outside of the UK?
Well, for some time now, at European level, we've been reviewing the MiFID directive. Currently, there is no harmonised taping regime across Europe, but that is very likely to change, so that each member state will have some form of taping requirement. The taping rule at a European level will most likely be defined under level 2 measures. However, they are still some way off. We've only just completed the level 1 of MiFID review. Yeah, so level 2 we don't anticipate at a minimum for the next year or so. So they are still some way off. We've been recently made aware that in the US, the CFTC have mandated, or proposed rather, that the commodity derivative firms record all voice and electronic communications that lead to the execution of a transaction, and that would be on either a mobile or a fixed phone. Where we require 6 months, they're actually talking about a 5-year retention period. So there are moves afoot internationally to keep up with the pace of technological change. Regulators around the world understand that technology has moved on, and that traders are moving their relevant conversations from voice onto other forms of media. So there is a definite trend for regulators to ensure that firms keep their record-keeping standards apace with the technological developments.
Now, rounding up, what's the one piece of advice or top tip you would give a firm to help them meet these regulations?
I think if a firm hasn't already done so, they've got something like 6 weeks to comply. If they are experiencing genuine problems, we would recommend that they talk to their FSA supervisor. But obviously the underlying recommendation is that they get a move on to do everything they can to meet this 14th of November deadline.
Thank you. Ryan, any top tips?
Yeah, so the time frames that Jocelyn's talking about, choose a hosted platform, choose something that isn't going to require a big implementation internally, and also look at a platform in regard to its future. You don't want to be caught with just a point solution and go through the pain of recording things, just to have to throw it away in 6 months' time and choose something new. So go hosted and choose one with a good roadmap going forwards.
And David, as the voice of compliance, top tip?
Well, if I'm allowed two top tips,
you're allowed to.
Fine. One will be to say that this really has to be woven very quickly into the active life of the dealing room itself, and therefore the compliance officers need to move quickly to write policy and to train the staff accordingly. The second point is not to make the mistake of thinking that recording and storage is game over. The fact is that if you have stored that information, you have constructive knowledge. You should at least be therefore carrying out sampling, auditing if you like from time to time, if not possibly even having real-time analysis and checking policy against the traffic.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you, Jocelyn. And once again, it's been a good chat here on Finextra. If you enjoyed this and you want to learn more, then watch out for our next module on this discussion. And we're going to be looking at making technical choices to meet the regulation. Thank you very much.